It got really cold last night, and so we're going to take a walk through the garden and take a look to see if that cold temperature here in West Michigan has damaged any of our plants. It was predicted it could get down to 29. I don't know how cold it got, but I do know that it definitely got below freezing. So we're going to check the plants out, check for damage. Also, there's been several questions that have come in as far as, hey Heidi, is this plant up in your garden yet? Mine isn't. So I thought, there's a few things I'll take a look to see if they are emerging. And also, the biggest thing this time of year that I just love is when the hostas or any of those chartreuse green foliage plants start to erupt and emerge from the earth. They are just so stunning and so beautiful. Even though they're not to their full potential yet, just that breaking through that ground is so beautiful. Hi, I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings, and let's go ahead and take a walk through my garden. There's a few flowers that are starting to flower, so I thought we might as well start off by showing you just some of the pretty spring blooms. Here in front of us we have the Bernera. This is Jack Frost, and just look at all those beautiful periwinkle blooms. 2 weeks ago when I was out in the garden, really there's hardly any foliage even showing yet on this plant, so for it to be just so full of flowers right now is simply breathtaking. Beyond it, tucked in the corner there, we've got some Dicentra, and we're going to be looking at Dicentra here in a minute as well out on the back hill. But these are in a little bit more of a protected area, so I think they're going to probably be a little further along than the ones that we'll be seeing in the back. But here up front, we have the Dicentra Valentine, and I just love those little red flowers as they just kind of dangle in the breeze. You can see it's just starting to flower. There's a lot of buds on here, but so pretty. Just a beautiful spring blooming perennial. Behind it, and I think even just a little bit prettier because of its chartreuse foliage, is the Dicentra Gold Heart. These are also called bleeding hearts, and you can just see how those little heart-shaped flowers are dangling on the stems. They just look like they are just dripping with color. I love the bleeding hearts, even before the flowers open. Ooh, they're really pretty. And here in the back are some that are just a little bit further along, trying to get the sun on them so it shows just the beauty of the flower and the foliage together. Bleeding heart, specifically here the gold heart, can get up to 3 foot tall and 3 foot wide, so it can turn out to be a pretty good sized plant. Depending where you're located, these may go dormant in the summertime, so be aware that when they're done flowering, if they feel like they kind of have died back a little bit, that is entirely possible. And these are shade plants, shade part shade. The grass is not looking too pretty yet. We haven't done our first mow of the season. So once we get out here and do that first mow, we'll kind of get rid of some of those hills that seem to be appearing. And a little bit of that is from moles or voles. But once we get a mow on it, it should flatten and even out really nicely. One thing I am thankful for today, and I've talked about them before, is my Hisea Boots, because this ground is so terribly wet. If I was wearing shoes right now, they would be soaking through to my socks, and that is a disgusting feeling in my opinion. Taking a look here under my deck, this is where a lot of the hostas and hellebores are housed. We'll see that these hostas are at various stages in their emerging this spring. Here, this one here, it's really pretty. The leaves hardly have started to unfurl yet, but look at those purple little spikes in the ground. It's just really kind of a interesting color and texture. Even though the plant hasn't really opened up yet, this texture I think is really quite nice. In the back there up against the house, you can see that hosta is just a little bit further along. They have definitely poked through the ground, and they are starting to untwirl or unfurl or whatever you want to say there. Let's just think about like unwrapping. Those are nice and tight, and those are starting to unwrap a little bit. Now the ones that are a little bit closer to the sun and getting more sun have opened up even more. And this is the hosta that I get asked the most about in my garden, and this is Hosta Liberty. And I think one thing that's interesting to point out with Hosta Liberty is when we look at this plant in the summer, it's going to be white and green. But this time of year, when it's freshly emerging, its chartreuse are yellow and green. So that is one thing to say about hostas, is they can look different at different times of year. So if you receive a hosta from us, from gardencrossings.com, and the colors just don't seem to match the picture that you're seeing online, that is entirely possible because it's the early growth color opposed to later in the season. Once they're in the sun more, they color up and get even more color on them. There's another hosta, and that one's almost fully open. That's going to be a really large hosta once it is fully mature. In the last garden tour, I showed you this hellebore here that was flowering nicely. And even though the flowers currently are past their prime, they still look really pretty. And that's the nice thing with hellebore, is even when the flowers are done per se, they still give you a lot of color for many weeks after they're in their prime. Underneath this hellebore, there's a bunch of little seedlings that are coming, and this only happens, I feel like, every 5 or so years that I find seedlings under here. So it's kind of ironic, I think, that it's not happening every year. But somebody had asked what we're going to do with those seedlings. I would say most of them will probably get torn out. Some we might leave, but I'd also be curious to maybe pull some out and transplant them into another spot to see what they do and what color they end up being. Realistically, I would think they should end up being the same pinkish color as the mother plant. Here's a flower that I had forgotten that we had even planted. This is a spring bulb, and I'm probably going to massacre the name. Like, I can see the word in my head, but it's super not familiar. This is the first time we've grown it, and I think it's called a Ferilia. We'll put the name on the screen of how it actually is said or what it looks like. But really, this is an early spring blooming bulb. I think they're so pretty. They come in yellow and also in orange, and I think there might be some orange somewhere out in the garden. But talking about frost damage, looking at this particular flower, I can see by looking at it, see how it's a little bit thin and lighter and transparent? That would be a sign that that got nipped by the cold. Even though it did get nipped by the cold, I don't think that it's going to be too adversely affected by that. I think it still looks quite pretty. My biggest concern is as we head out back to the hostas that are not under the deck or in protection, what they're going to look like. So here's our butterfly bush, Miss Molly. And like I mentioned in the earlier, we are zone 6A. And typically butterfly bush for us, it's really hit and miss what they do. Sometimes they grow back from the base, which this one is doing. So let's go in and take a closer look there. You can see there's a lot of growth down there. But this year, because we had pretty warm weather this winter, I'm getting a lot of growth, like almost fully up to the very tips and top of this plant. So 2 things you can do. One thing is you can just leave it, and especially this year, because it has leafed out very well, like all the way to the tippy top of the plant, it should fill out and look pretty nice. But what we typically do is we'll cut it back down to about 12 to 18 inches and just let it emerge from the base. Is there benefits to one over the other? So the benefit of trimming it back from the base, personally, I think you're going to have a nicer, fuller butterfly bush. It'll be more compact. If you let this growth stay here on the old wood or old twigs, you're going to probably have a taller butterfly bush. It might look a little bit, I'm going to say scrappy looking. I don't know, maybe not quite as well kept as if you were to trim it back a little bit. Now, that's a personal preference. There is no right or no wrong way of doing it. And as I mentioned, this is coming back quite nice, so I could go ahead and just leave it as is. But I think when the gardeners come through, I'm going to have them trim it back because I like them to be a little bit more compact. So somebody had asked if my spigilla, my little redheads were coming up yet. And this is the area where the little redheads are planted. And the answer is a little. So as we go in closer here, you can see there's a lot of twigs left from last year. But as we go in closer there, you can see it is just barely starting to sprout. So if your spigilla has not sprouted yet, I think the answer is do not be afraid, because mine are just barely poking through the ground. All right, let's take a look, see if anything else in here maybe got nipped by the frost. I definitely see plants where the frost is sitting on them. I should have got out a little earlier before the sun came up, where now it's starting to melt some of the frost off. But here's a lupin. And look at that. I mean, as pretty as this is, look at that. I love how those ice crystals look on the foliage. And I would say, even though this very obviously got hit with frost, it doesn't look like it's affected at all. So that's a great thing. Another plant somebody was asking me about if it had emerged, and I wasn't sure, was the Amsonia. This is Amsonia storm cloud. And yes, Amsonia storm cloud has emerged. It's about 18 inches tall. And the beautiful thing with Amsonia storm cloud is when it's coming out of the ground, it's got gorgeous, dark, almost black stems. Now this one here is already putting on flowers too. So these flowers are still pretty tight, probably another couple weeks before they're really blooming. But this too, I can see got nipped, not nipped, but got hit by the frost and does not seem to be affected. So that again is a great thing. All right, let's go check out the hostas, because that's where my big concern lies. So most of my hostas are fairly protected underneath trees, which definitely gives them a little benefit from frost. So when it gets frosty out, the frost is going to naturally kind of land on what's highest. So if there's a tree above your hostas, it's going to hit that tree first, and the tree is going to give protection to the plants. So not a ton of the hostas actually are up yet. If you watched any of my videos from last summer, you would know that this area here is just loaded with hostas. There's a couple that are emerging, but really not many. So there's not a whole lot to worry about, because even though it did get cold, there's not many that have really emerged that would have been affected. And those that we are seeing currently look perfectly fine. What you might find with hostas, if they get nipped by the cold, is that they become kind of transparent. The leaves become transparent and or will start to turn brown. Does it hurt the plant? No. Does it make the plant look a little ugly? Maybe. But you know what? The plant will be fine. Not all is lost. Here's a beautiful Pulmonaria blooming. I love these things too. Like the Bernera, the pink and purple flowers here on this particular one are just so stunning in the early spring. I believe this one here is, actually there's a tag. Let's see if what my head was thinking is right. This, oh, spot on. That's exactly what I was thinking it was. Huh? Let's see, will it focus? There you go, spot on. And there's 3 of them planted here. 2 of them are a little bit bigger than the third, but great early color. Now we've had a lot of windy days, and there are some pretty big branches that have fallen out of our maple tree there. This maple tree, actually, I'm going to call it a junk maple tree, as are most of them that are on this back hill. When we bought this house, this tree had fallen over, so we trimmed it back and left the stump in the ground. Well, that stump sent up suckers, and that's why we've got a multi-stemmed maple tree. It's a silver maple, so they're kind of softer maples and kind of junky and make a mess anyways. And so there's a lot of dead going on in that tree, and really it should come down at some point. But until then, we're going to be dealing with sticks in the yard. So as I mentioned, one thing I really love about this time of year when the plants are emerging is when these chartreuse green or yellow plants start to emerge. So as you can see, there's not a ton yet in this area that is fully leafed out. But the things that are really popping out, especially back from my house, is the yellows and the chartreuse greens. So let's take a closer look. I'm going to unearth this one from the twig because I don't want this one to be damaged. Now, I apologize because we have so many hostas back here. I do not know exactly what their names are. So I'm going to put that right up front. If you ask me the name of the hosta, I am more than likely not going to know what it is. But what you can look for is the ones that are chartreuse in color. I'll put a link below to all of our hostas, and you can take a look at all the various ones that we have available. But just look at that. Look how that's popping, especially up against those dark wood chips. Other plants that give you that same visual effect are the dicentra, or bleeding heart. This one here is gold heart. Not as far along as what the ones up front were, but look at that beautiful chartreuse green foliage. Really kind of pops. Behind it is a sedge grass, and I think I'll see if we still carry this one. I'm not sure which one it is. So I'll put a link below if we still carry it. But again, chartreuse green foliage, really beautiful, pops when it just starts to emerge. Put a couple daffodils in because that yellow too is a great splash of color. Here's another hosta, bright yellow in color and very vibrant here in the garden. Just starting to kind of open up. The hellebore are still looking fabulous back here as well. These are the double hellebores, and let's peek them over. They're kind of more the nodding variety, so they fall over. So that's where it's kind of important to have color on the back side. That way, as they're nodding, you're still seeing lots of color. But let's tip one over and see. Really pretty. So these aren't quite as far along. Well, some of them are. They're not quite as far along as the ones under the deck. But look at this. This is just loaded with beautiful blooms. And this is one plant. That was another question that was asked in the last video, is how many plants are planted there? That there is one plant, and it's about 2.5 to 3 foot wide. Tucked behind it is another hellebore, darker flowers. Again, nodding, but with that dark backside foliage, but with that dark backside of the leaf petals, it's really showing a lot of color. So let's flip one of these over and take a look. Beautiful ruffled. Look at those. Aren't they gorgeous? Behind it, this one here, I do know the name of. This one's confetti cake. And this is a white one with speckling. Downward facing. But really pretty. Big blooms. Look at that beautiful kind of confetti look to it. Another beautiful one. So this is the first flower in the garden to emerge and to give me any type of color, are the hellebores, and they are looking really beautiful. Back to that chartreuse foliage. Here's another gold heart, bleeding heart planted next to the hellebore, and I'm going to try to get an angle where the sun kind of justifies it a little bit. It's kind of a little harsh right now. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning. But there you can see that chartreuse or yellow foliage up against the greens there of the hellebore. And even those two foliage next to each other really complement each other and also contrast each other nicely. Planting the bright with the dark makes things pop as well. Here's another one. I made sure we put a lot of bleeding heart and a lot of yellow plants out here just for this purpose. So when I'm standing at the house looking out the window, I can see these early pops of color. So I'd have to say we got pretty lucky with the cold temperatures last night. I am not seeing much frost damage, which is so wonderful. So what should or could you have done to protect your plants from frost? The biggest thing we recommend doing is placing a blanket or a sheet over your plants to protect them. The frost will land on that blanket or sheet, and it will also help kind of keep your plants insulated so that they don't get cold. The one thing we do not recommend for your plants to be covered with is plastic. If you put plastic over top of them, it's going to actually make them colder. So a sheet or a blanket is your best option when trying to protect your plants from frost damage. Oh, here's a beautiful storm cloud. Not flowering quite yet, but here I think you can see that dark black foliage I was talking about. And just loads, let's get a top view, loads and loads of flowers. Just look at all those buds on top. This is going to be so beautiful once it starts to bloom, and I'll make sure to get out here and show you because this is one of my really, I don't know, love it spring flowers. You may find that I do say that about a lot of things. So it's like a parent picking your favorite child. It's a little hard. Hibiscus is another plant that I often get asked, why aren't they emerging yet? And specifically, it is the hardy hibiscus. So let's go in and take a look in this little area of the garden because I have several of them planted here. So what I'm looking for to know where they're at specifically is these little twigs. So I did trim these back in the fall. Not everyone's going to recommend that you do that, but that's what I do because that's what works for us. And as you can see, there's no green coming from anywhere. So these will probably be another month or so before we see any type of greenery emerge. And that doesn't scare me because I know this is the last plant way after most of the plants in my garden start to green up or emerge to show any signs of life. The beautiful thing with the hardy hibiscus though is once they do sprout, they go to town. Usually from the first sign of the foliage to the first flower, it's about 2 months. So they're really quick to put on color. And as I was walking past here, I saw some color, and I want to show you this. This is a flowering quince. This one here is actually double take red, and it is, or double take scarlet, excuse me, and it is so pretty. Look at that. All of these beautiful red little rosette looking blooms, pretty much lining each and every stem. This is one of those that I like to say blooms from tip to toe. Look at all of those beautiful flowers just lining all of the stems. This is a great spring blooming shrub. Blooms just maybe a touch later than the forsythia, which are the yellow flowering shrubs that you may have seen around. They're quite iconic, I think, for spring. But look at all of that beautiful color. So I would say this plant here is probably about 8 foot tall and 8 foot wide. I don't believe this one has ever been trimmed because of the location it's in. It's kind of just planted back here by the creek to fill in this location, which it does a nice job of, and also just adds just a little here poke of color. So this is the double take flowering quince, also thornless, and it is the scarlet color. Let's go in and take a closer look here at the flowers. Look at those beautiful buds. And such a cheery, welcoming spring bloom. For those of you who have watched our channel for a while, you may know that I planted a ton of the Inca alstroemeria. So the Peruvian lilies, and we have a beautiful Inca ice plant up by the house that's no longer available. So I thought, let's plant all of these others that are not even friendly for my zone in the garden and just see what they do. So most of these Inca alstroemerias that I planted are zone 7 or 8. And like I said, we're a 6A. No, excuse me, we're a 6B. And this is the 3rd year we're going on with these planted out here in my garden. And I wanted to show you that again, many of them have come back. You can just see just a little bit of greenery there. There were 12. I'm kind of counting as I'm going. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's 9 of the 12 that have come back. And I know last year we had lost a couple. So I'm pretty sure maybe we lost one more this year. But these again are all zone 7 and 8 and have come back in my zone 6 garden with no problem. So this is one plant that definitely is an excellent annual. If it only blooms and flowers for you 1 year, oh well. It's beautiful, it blooms all summer. But if you can get that thing planted in the ground and it comes back for you, that's a bonus plant because it's one of those unexpected things that happens that you get to enjoy for several years. Woodgilla wine and roses just starting to emerge. That's kind of pretty too, just seeing that dark foliage here on these twigs. It's just always so fun to see the new life in the garden in the spring, wouldn't you agree? One more plant that's flowering, so we'll end with this one. It is a Polemonium, Heaven Sent, Jacob's Ladder. Look at that beautiful dark olive foliage, hints of burgundy, beautiful purple blooms just starting to emerge. And the nice thing with this heaven scent is it's so fragrant. It smells like, I don't know, grapes, I guess is how I describe it. So beautiful, beautiful plant. Flower buds just waiting. We just got a couple little flowers that we're able to enjoy today, but really another nice, fun, spring blooming perennial. So hopefully I was able to get a few things answered for you today. Checking out the perennials to see just how far along some of them are that you had asked me about in the comments. Also enjoying the beautiful chartreuse and yellow-green foliage of so many of the perennials in the garden. And also taking a look at frost damage, which fortunately enough, we did not experience much, if any at all. But also too, I'm hoping that that tip of what to do if you're gonna get frost in your area is helpful to you. Because if you have the option or opportunity to get outside and just cover them, that sheet or blanket is what's gonna work best. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching. I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings.